watching California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerantz. I'm glad you're with us. Over this half hour, we'll be speaking with three constitutional officers from the state of California. We'll start with John Gean. He is the controller of the state. We will then be joined by Betty Yee and George Runner. They are both members of the Board of Equalization, of which you are also a member.
I am. I'm the fifth member.
I was going to say,
welcome to Sacramento, by the way.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here. I want to talk to you, though, about the recent pension reform plan. Some would have never expected that pension reform could pass in California, but it did. What do you make of it?
Well, that was the sentiment 2 years ago. They said nothing was going to happen, and actually they took some strong first steps. Some things they thought would never be done. There were some market corrections, so they've made progress.
So let's talk about whether this is a first step worthy of admiration or a first step that is just so pathetic that it's not even worthy of discussion.
Well, it is worthy of merit. So when you talk about just the state component, CalPERS, we're looking at savings over the next 30 years of anywhere from $32 to $55 billion. That's a lot of money. If you're looking at CalSTRS, we're looking at $20 billion. Obviously, we still have the huge question mark about what's happening with the public equity markets.
Right.
And so that's going to have a profound impact on what the returns are going to be, and so there may be additional changes that need to take place.
I do want to ask you about local governments, municipalities, because as you know, as we speak today, two major cities in our state have filed for bankruptcy, Stockton and San Bernardino. Mammoth Lake's filed, but for different reasons. Right. Others may be coming down the pike. And the mayors of both cities have said that the weight of pension obligations, one of the reasons that they filed for bankruptcy. Will municipalities get relief based upon this pension reform package?
Well, this pension reform package applies to employees going forward.
Right.
So that you will accrue cost savings, significant cost savings for the new employees. Now, obviously, we have to address some of the current issues that apply to them. And then we have to look at the bankruptcies, as you correctly pointed out. It is one of the factors, but there are a lot of factors. Both Stockton and San Bernardino really focused on development, upgrading their communities, and unfortunately, part of the problem was their timing was off. We saw what happened with the real estate market. We saw what happened with the financial crisis in the United States and California.
And simultaneously, they lost redevelopment dollars. So they were redeveloping, and all of a sudden, those funds vanished. Pension obligations were rising. So it really was a perfect storm, sadly, for these cities. Please.
You also put your finger on a very important pressure point. So my office is doing about 400 audits of the redevelopment agencies. And as we've done audits over the years, whether it's Bell, whether it's Montebello, whether it's Los Angeles Community College District, just recently Hercules, and we're in Stockton, one of the things we have to identify is we're going to get a better examination of city finances. Were they borrowing too much from the redevelopment agencies? Now that redevelopment agencies have ended, are they in sound shape or not? So that will be an important point that will be highlighted pretty soon.
At the same time, there's been a lot of consternation about the end of redevelopment. Were there abuses? I'm sure there were. You have indicated as such through audits. But there are a lot of places where we can point and we can say, this is where redevelopment worked. I mean, we're from Los Angeles. We look at Hollywood. We look at South Los Angeles. It's hard to deny that redevelopment really spurred the revitalization of those areas. Other cities as well, Riverside, beautiful redevelopment as a result of efficient redevelopment agencies. So it begs the question, what do we see in terms of the future of redevelopment? I know you're not in the legislature, but what's your sense?
Well, couple of points. Number one, there were some abuses. They were stretching the definition of redevelopment. So in my review of 18 redevelopment agencies after they had this discussion in Sacramento, part of redevelopment included out in, we were talking about your area, Riverside, one area, they were developing a 4.5-star golf resort with redevelopment dollars. That's not what redevelopment dollars was intended to do. The entire city of Coronado was a redevelopment agency. Now, those multi-million-dollar properties, they may be in your neighborhood, but they're not in the neighborhood I live in, Brad. So that's not, should have been entirely a redevelopment agency. But you point out correctly, there are some areas, there was some positive development. They're talking about different types of reform. We have to figure out how we fix low and mod affordable housing. We have to look at truly blighted areas, not just undeveloped land and call it blighted areas, and then we can go forward.
But I guess part of the concern that I see is we see the headlines coming out of your office. Now, I know you're not telling the press what to write, but we see the headlines and they tend to be this agency abused redevelopment dollars. Are we going to start seeing audits that show the positive effects of redevelopment? Or have they been released and we just haven't heard about them?
Well, we've done a couple audits on for some of those redevelopment agencies. So the good thing you want to do is to see whether they've operated with a clean balance sheet. Will they be able to pay back their debt? Will they be able to move monies they no longer can use back to the appropriate agencies, the taxing agencies, so that we have a sound financial house here in California?
Let's talk about our sound financial house, or the goal or hope for a sound financial house. It seems as if revenues are coming in not too poorly. I mean, they're pretty much hitting expectations, estimates, but we do know that we have a couple of propositions on the ballot in the fall. I want to focus on one, and that is Proposition 30. And the reason I focus on that is because the budget passed in June assumed that Prop 30 would pass. If it does not pass, there are trigger cuts that automatically go into play. So could you talk us through the possibilities with the passage or failure of Prop 30 and how it will impact the state budget?
So back to your underlying introductory point, so far revenues for the first 2 months in the state of California are right in that spot. So up to date, we are $41 million short of budget estimates, and when you're talking about a $92 billion budget, that's the rounding error. That's the rounding error, so that's fine. Rather be 41 million plus, but it's as close as you get in an estimation. The Prop 30 provides additional revenues, a slight sales tax increase of a quarter of 1 penny for a 4-year period of time, an increase in taxes. If the measure fails, we're looking at a cut of about $6 billion to education, $5.4 billion to K through 14 education, perhaps a reduction in the school year from 175 school days to 160. And then we're looking at a cut to higher education of $500 million.
And what's remarkable is you may have heard that the Cal State system sent a letter to every single applicant that is applying for the fall of 2013, telling them that if Prop 30 does not pass, they will be admitting fewer students than they would have. What do you make of that letter and that statement?
I think it's pretty consistent with what we've witnessed over the past few years. We've gone through these past few budget years, especially when you witness what happened with the turmoil in California's finances in 2008, 2009, by not giving education all the money that they're due. We had a year where there were $11 billion in deferrals. We're not fully paid up on maintenance factor. It's one of the under the Prop 98 formula that the voters passed a couple decades ago. So we have today in California 188 school districts that are in negative or qualified certification, meaning that they have some type of financial tension.
And you know the Englewood Unified School District just had to be bailed out, rescued.
And my office is going to be involved with it.
There you have it. I do want to, though, ask you about the mood of California as it relates to Prop 30 and even Prop 38, which is a competing tax initiative. When you think about the fact that the Amazon tax has just kicked in, you think about the fact that LA County, the largest county in our state, has an extension of a transportation tax. That's going to be on the ballot in November. You have the lumber tax, you have the fire tax, and now we have these propositions. I mean, is California willing to stomach a tax increase?
Yeah, obviously the people who are the proponents of Prop 30 and others are going to have to make a very compelling message and demonstrate that they can be trusted as to how they're going to handle the money.
Has the Comptroller before me taken a position on either initiative?
I have. I support Prop 30.
Why?
California needs to compete in the global economy. We need to make sure our kids get a world-class education. We're frankly behind in regards to the 175 days that kids are in the classroom, so I don't want to see our progress be stymied by a further reduction of kids in the classroom.
Okay, his name is John Gean. He is the Comptroller for the state of California. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Betty Yee. She's a member of the Board of Equalization. I'm Brad Pomerantz. We'll be right back on California Edition.
As California's Chief Fiscal Officer, how many boards and commissions does Comptroller Chang serve? 57, 73, 81, or 93? As the state's chief fiscal officer, the controller serves on 81 boards and commissions.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Palmer. It's glad you're still with us. Our guest, Betty Yee. Betty is a member of the State Board of Equalization in our great state of California. And before we speak about one of my favorite places to go, food trucks,
Yes.
I must ask you about the Amazon tax,
Yes.
which is now in full play.
Yes, it
Could
is.
you explain it to us and how it's impacting Californians?
Yes, absolutely. So California consumers, starting September 15th,
Right.
when they go online to shop, they should be assessed tax, and it's collected by the online retailer and then paid to the state on their behalf. And prior to that time, it was the consumer's responsibility, and so now we're making it easy and the retailer gets to collect it.
What was interesting is before September 15th, sometimes I was charged sales tax and sometimes I wasn't.
Yes.
I never could figure out why sometimes it happened and why it didn't. Do you know?
Yes, yes. You were charged sales tax before September 15th by retailers online that have a presence in California. So if you go on, Target.com, any
Sure.
of these others that have a presence in California, they are obligated to collect tax and always have been and pay it to the state. For those who don't have a presence, like Amazon, physical
Right.
presence, they have to, when they make the sale to a California consumer, the consumer is responsible for paying the tax.
But how does it work as it relates to different counties? Because
Yes.
each county can have a
Yes.
different sales tax.
Exactly.
And that will be relevant when we talk about food trucks.
Yes,
so
exactly.
how does that work out?
The consumer, prior to September 15th, had to know the rate of tax to report it and pay it on their tax returns. Now the retailer needs to understand what the rates are in every
And figure it
jurisdiction.
out.
Yes, but we have resources on our website that can guide them in that
But the
regard.
point is that these internet retailers, they don't need to send a check to each county. They send
No.
it to the state and it passes through.
That's exactly right. We do the allocation to the county.
Okay, let's
Yes.
talk about food trucks.
Yes,
I have to admit,
exciting.
my wife and I love food trucks. I mean,
Yes.
who would have thought that roach coaches would become the shishi thing?
I have a hunkering for the grilled cheese myself.
I was gonna
so,
say,
yes.
but just like internet retailers, food trucks are obligated.
Yes.
Or are they? Because I'm a little confused. Are we charged sales tax on food?
Yes, all hot food especially.
Hot food.
And
Explain.
most food trucks sell hot foods.
Right.
These are extensions of restaurants, or they could be standalone entities, but most of them do sell hot food, and hot food, whether it's eaten on the premises or to go, is always taxed.
What about, I've gone to an ice cream sandwich truck.
Yes.
Would that be taxable?
No, hot foods are not,
So it's only hot food.
right.
So if I went to a fruit stand or an
Right.
ice cream, that's very interesting.
Yes.
Okay, but the bottom line is, these are confusing times.
Yes.
A lot of the food trucks, remarkable food, but it could be that they are not an extension of an existing business.
That's right. And what we've seen with this economy is we're seeing many of these, and we have about 4,000 food trucks, by the way, in California.
Wow.
So it's really gaining popularity. But we have, with the economy, just people wanting to start their own businesses, very low overhead
Right.
in terms of costs, and so they're starting these food trucks. And but they are standalone, and they need to essentially understand the tax laws that apply to restaurants.
And so the tax laws are simple.
Yes.
If it's hot food,
Yes.
you need to charge sales tax.
Yes.
And if you drive between counties, then what?
Well, if you drive between counties, you need to understand the rate of tax within that jurisdiction and collect that tax at that rate. Now, the other thing I should say is with a restaurant, you can have to go or to eat on the premises. We're assuming that most food trucks, people purchase the items to go. If you eat on the premises, whether it's hot or cold, it's always taxed, the food.
But if you walk away with your taco,
Yes.
is it taxed?
Well, if the taco's hot, yes.
If it's cold, it wouldn't be taxed no matter what. I'm trying to understand the distinction between
Anything that's
on-premises.
prepared, yeah, and on premises, you're probably going to walk away and not take a bite right there at the food
Right,
stand,
exactly.
Yes.
So to-goes are taxed.
To-goes are not taxed.
Are not
generally.
taxed. So if I went to
but all hot foods are. So if it's a hot food to go, it's confusing. So
But here's the good news,
Yes.
is that the Board of Equalization is there to help.
Absolutely.
It's not just there to cause grief.
no, we want these businesses to be successful.
Exactly.
Yes.
So talk to us about the services that you are offering, which are numerous.
Yes.
They are multilingual.
Yes.
They are by telephone.
Yes.
There are people in the field to offer assistance.
Absolutely. We have people who visit businesses on an ongoing basis to be sure they're complying with the law, have the right permits. So that's a source of assistance. We have a information center through a toll-free number that businesses can call. That's also a resource. We have a website that is complete with all kinds of information, including in-language resources as well.
I know that sometimes when I go to a food truck, the total amount will be $8.
Yes.
It wouldn't be $8.86. I'm
Right,
just making
right,
that up, or
right.
$8.96,
Yes,
whatever it was.
yes.
And it's very confusing to
Yes,
me
uh-huh.
because I think, well, what about sales tax?
Sure. In that case, probably tax is included in the price charged to the customer. And what we tell vendors is you must post that on your premises. That tax is included in the purchase price. And what the business owner will then do is file their returns and essentially back out that portion of the purchase price that is taxed and remit
It would
that.
seem that would be almost more complicated for the vendor than if they just charge the sales
Well,
tax,
it's
or
either
maybe
complicated upfront in terms of handling change, or it's
Right.
complicated at the time they file the return, but they can make the choice.
So as we've seen this proliferation of food trucks, have you seen compliance or have you seen a lot of non-compliance, scofflaws?
I will say that many of these vendors really want to do the right thing and want to comply. It is very, very difficult if they've not been in the restaurant business to understand the laws, so we want to provide additional assistance to those business owners. But the key here is really seek your assistance. The Board of Equalization is a resource, and we want to be sure that you're keeping the appropriate records. Most of these establishments are cash-based businesses,
Well, clearly.
and so we clearly want to see good documentation in terms of records about sales.
And discuss that because one can be audited.
Absolutely, and so you don't want to get caught in an audit to where you don't have compliance up until that point, and we can actually go, if you haven't been collecting sales tax, we can go back as far as 8 years to be sure that you are current with respect to remitting tax to the state.
Now, I know the BOE is hiring, not only because they have the funds, but towards the Amazon tax, they're going to bring on more,
Yes.
and that hopefully will be a net gain for the state. So along those lines, when an agent, is that the name of a BOE representative?
Yes,
An
uh-huh.
agent will go out to these food trucks.
Sure.
Are they also looking at health and safety? Because, look, I'm presuming these are not the roach coaches of our
Right,
youth.
right.
That these, but do they have the authority to look at health and safety issues?
We do not have the authority to look at health and safety issues, but we do work in tandem with local officials that look at health and safety issues, also look at local business licensing requirements. And so as we find that there are issues in these areas, we oftentimes will be in communication with the local officials, but that is not within the jurisdiction of the board.
So I mentioned the BOE is hiring. Let's talk
Yes,
about that
yes.
because California's unemployment rate continues to be a bit stubborn.
Yes.
And while public employment rates are down, look, if the BOE needs to hire to enforce the Amazon tax, it's going to, I presume, they will make money
Yes,
on these hires.
yes.
So let's talk about the hires. Who are you hiring? How can we apply? What kind of credentials do you need?
Absolutely. We are hiring mostly compliance specialists, what we call specialists who will go out, do the education with consumers about what's required under the new law, do the education and orientation with retailers and know what they are subject to under the new law. We have legal staff because the law is fairly complex
Yes.
with respect to the collection obligation by these out-of-state retailers. And there were a number of criteria that were spelled out in the legislation that may make one retailer eligible and another not.
And it is interesting because I understand there's $1 million cap,
Yes.
or is that a floor? I guess it's a floor. But do you have to have affiliates in state to still be required? No. It's
No.
simply the
That's
million.
That's one of the criteria.
Okay.
So you either have affiliates in state. You are an entity that is part of a larger corporate entity for
understand.
combined reporting purposes, for income tax purposes, and then the $1 million threshold in
Right.
terms of annual.
Is it time to have a federal law on this issue?
I think it is.
Her name is Betty Yee. She's a member of the Board of Equalization. I'm Brad Pomerantz. We'll be right back on California Edition.
As of October 1st, 2012, how many states have passed the Amazon tax? 5, 10, 15, or 20? 10. In chronological order, the following states have passed the Amazon tax: New York, North Carolina, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Illinois, Arkansas, Texas, Pennsylvania, California, and Georgia.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerantz. Glad you're still with us. Our guest, George Runner. Senator Runner is a member of the California Board of Equalization. Sir, we thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely. I want to speak with you about I'll call it a tax, I'll call it a fee. I'm not sure what to call it, but it is a charge on individuals living in rural areas that are seen as higher risk for fire.
Well, and that's certainly the reason as to why it was put on. I disagree the issue of the requirement of being higher risk for fire and then having to pay this fee. But that was the background. The idea is that it started with the fact that the state needed money. What a concept.
Right.
And so the legislature, the governor took about $90 million away from CAL FIRE.
Right.
That was used for fire prevention. And then they needed to backfill those dollars. So what they determined is that they were going to set a new fee for individuals who lived in what's called state responsibility areas. That's where CAL FIRE has the first responsibility to respond to a fire, theoretically.
And are those considered higher risk areas?
Well, it can be. They can be right outside a city council or a city limit that way. And so the idea was that because of that, we're going to go ahead and give them a charge. The charge is $150 per inhabitable structure that would be on the property. And so there's about 800,000 of these that are in California. These bills have started going out a few months ago. They should be just concluding about now, and people are now getting this bill. It's problematic on a number of levels for me.
We'll talk about that. But what about the argument of the proponents, which are you have chosen to reside in an area with a higher risk of fire, and as a result, if you lived in a flood area, that you should pay just a little bit more to protect your homes from fire?
Well, we don't do that with flood areas. We don't do that with earthquake areas. We don't do that with crime areas. So what happens is there's an assumption that we need to charge you more because of the services that you may need. Well, the reality is most of those fires that we deal with aren't in those neighborhoods. They're far out in the outskirts of the big fires that we have. Now, sometimes they creep into those areas and they're devastating when they're in those areas. But certainly out of those 800,000 people who are getting those bills, many of them live in areas that are absolutely no fire risk at all.
So as you speak with constituents in these areas, and I understand that about half of those that are impacted by this new charge live in your district.
Right, because of the mountain desert areas.
Right. What are they saying to you?
They're angry. They're angry on a number of levels. Number one, they just don't think it's fair. I compare this to what you would never see is going to, for instance, urban areas and say, we've looked at crime rates and you have a higher crime rate in your area. We need to put a crime prevention fee on you because
maybe it's a good idea.
Maybe you obviously have a greater use in your neighborhood to sending people to prison than people in other areas, and it just isn't fair. And why don't you, if you don't like that, just go ahead and move out of those high crime areas. Well, people just don't do that.
Well, let's talk about the legal side of this, because there is no doubt that this issue it impacts some legal principles.
Right.
As we know, in order to pass a tax in California, we need a 2/3 vote.
Right.
That was reaffirmed in 2010 by Proposition 26 and 25, actually, which changed the budget mandate in terms of majority versus 2/3. So this was passed with the 50% plus one.
Right, in the legislature.
In the legislature, signed by the governor. And so for us, what was the argument that it did not need a 2/3?
Well, the argument is that it's a fee. People are getting a certain service for this fee, and it's a direct service that they're getting dollar for dollar for the cost of servicing them. And you could still do that with the simple majority vote bill. The problem is that's not what's happening here. And that's why this is ripe for lawsuit, and that's why a lawsuit will be filed.
But Prop 26 did expand the definition of fees that would be subjected to a 2/3 vote. So is the argument, and help me out if you may, that this is a fee subjected to a 2/3 under Prop 26, or this is a tax that always should have been subjected?
The lawsuit will be it's a tax because it's broad-based in terms of what it is that it's supposed to be paying for. It's going against, people are having to pay this to get absolutely no service out of it. Remember, the issue that
so
people...
that's the key, is there's no additional service?
Right, there's no additional service, plus you can't show a direct benefit. There are some people who absolutely will get zero benefit from this. So therefore, it becomes a tax, a general tax. The fact is, and this is important for people to realize, there's no new, people say, well, how can you argue for this when we have such devastating fires?
Yeah.
The reality is there's no new fire trucks here, there's no firefighters, there's no hose, there's no helicopters.
But arguably, and more importantly, if the lawsuit is successful,
Right.
that means that the state is out $90 million.
Right.
Which is a significant chunk of change. And in these tough fiscal times, should we be parading for the elimination of $90 million?
Well, no, what we should be doing, though, is making sure that our tax dollars go for first priority items. And in my opinion, and I think the opinion of most Californians, and when you come to public safety, whether that's fire protection, public safety, keeping your streets safe, that should be the first priority of government. And so then all of a sudden carve out what should be the first priority of government and say, oh, now we're going to charge you an extra fee or tax for that, but not address other issues of government seems to be a bit backwards.
Let us presume that the lawsuit is successful. Are the proponents of the lawsuit offering a solution to plug that hole?
Well,
is it not their role?
Well, the simplest solution is, hey, go back to the legislature and try to get your 2/3 vote.
Okay.
Right? I mean, that would solve the issue
Sure.
because the lawsuit's going to be based upon the fact that you did it with a simple majority. So if it's good policy and you think it's appropriate, then go back to the legislature and get your 2/3.
What about equal protection? I mean, is there an equal protection argument here that people are being treated differently based upon where they live?
I think fundamentally that's part of the bad policy that's here. And again, just because you live in a state responsibility area doesn't mean you're at greater risk. And in fact, 90% of these people actually pay extra themselves for a fire district that they've joined.
I understand that. Yes.
And so and of the $150, this gives them a $35 discount, in spite of the fact that they paid extra for that fire protection on their own and voted to do that and put that in place.
But I do want to push you because you were a member of the legislature. If the lawsuit is successful, they can't get the 2/3,
Right.
which could be difficult. Where do we plug that hole?
Well, then that's up to the legislature because obviously it's not. What the people would be saying then, and the court would be saying is
on behalf of the people,
on
presumably.
behalf of the people, is that you got to do this. You've got to do if you want to do this public policy, then you need it with a 2/3 vote. If you can't get the 2/3 vote out of the legislature, then it's not a public policy that the legislature supports enough. Then you've got to go back to other ways as to where you're going to get backfill of money.
So let's talk about the budget because we know that the budget continues to be a challenge for the state. Revenues actually are better than they had been.
Sure, they're going up a bit.
Yeah, but we know that the Amazon tax has kicked in. Whether it's a good tax or a bad tax, that's another
Or how much
conversation.
money you'll actually see is still out there.
And the Facebook IPO, maybe not so good. But be that as it may, where do we stand in your mind in terms of getting our budget back in order?
Well, I don't think this legislature has learned how to still live within its means, and unfortunately, I think this budget issue is coming up, before the voters coming up in November. The fact is that I don't appreciate. I don't think Californians appreciate the threat that's going out there. Hey, you either vote for this or your kids are going to be out of school for 10 days.
You know what's interesting, and I hear you, and I've heard that is that. What the legislature did in June is they said, we're not going to cut today. We're not cutting in June. And we're going to hope you vote for Prop 30.
Yeah, but what they also did, and this is where I think they offend voters, is they said we're going to cut. We may have to cut days of school if you don't go ahead and vote for this tax increase. But what they don't tell you is they actually added a whole new year of school called transitional kindergarten in this year's budget.
Is that a bad thing?
Well, it's going to cost $3 billion new. So how do you go back to voters and say we're going to start cutting back on what we already do? At the same time, you're actually adding new programs to the state of California's cost to taxpayers.
What do you say to the CSU or UC student who's not getting in because spots have been cut as a result of a failure, for example, of Prop 30?
Well, again, I'm not sure if that threat's actually going to be followed through. I'm offended again by the threats that are out there.
Are they threats?
I think so. I'll give you an example. Last year's budget, they had a number of triggers in last year's budget that they said if this budget, if our funds run low, if we don't get the federal money, then we're going to have to do all these triggers. And they didn't pull them.
Okay. His name is George Runner. He is a member of the State Board of Equalization. I'm Brad Palmer. Thank you so much for watching California Edition.